Hey guys, welcome back to Flatpak Effects, and today I'm going to show you how to make these 2D explosions. Now this is a really cool effect and you can use it in so many different applications, so I thought I'd share with you exactly how these are made. Now the best part about this is that I'm showing you a way we can make this without using any third-party plugins. So we're only going to use what's available to us inside of After Effects. Now for those of you that are interested in learning more about this effect, or you just want to support me in what I'm doing on YouTube, then please check out the link in the description below to my 2D explosion pack, and this comes loaded with 21 pre-rendered explosions as well as the After Effects project file. So I'd really appreciate if you check that out. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is right click, create a new composition. Now I'm just going to set mine to be 25 frames, set this up as 1080-25, and just give yourself a good few seconds of duration there. Okay, so the way we actually create this is first we're going to create a solid. Now the color doesn't really matter at this point because we're going to be changing this. Now the way we actually create the explosion is by using CC particle systems, which is built into After Effects. So this comes preloaded in every After Effects version from CS6 upwards, and we can find it by coming up to Effect, down to Simulation, and this is it here, Particle Systems 2. Now when I first turn that on, it's going to give you something that doesn't look like an explosion at all. So we need to mess around with a few of these settings here. And we're going to start with our playhead at the start here. We're going to create a keyframe for the birth rate, and we're going to change this to be 0. Now you'll need to follow along carefully here because we've got to change a lot of these settings. Next, we're going to change the longevity to be 3.5. And I'll try and explain some of these as I go along, but first we're just going to set up a lot of these parameters just so we can get started. Now I'm going to change these to be 0. Next, we're going to enter into the physics. We're going to change our velocity to be 0. We're also going to create a keyframe for that velocity. We're going to change the gravity to be 0. Resistance, we're going to create a keyframe. We're going to change this to be 4.7. The direction, we're also going to change to 0. Okay, next we're going to come down to particle. Now here is very important. We're going to change this to be lens convex. And then we're going to change our birth size to be 0. We're going to create a keyframe for that one as well. The depth size to be 0 as well as a keyframe. We're going to change the size variation to be 100%. We're going to leave this as fade out. We're going to change the maximum opacity to 100%. We're going to leave these at their default for the time being. We're also going to change this random seed to be 430. Okay, now at the moment, we're not actually going to see anything because a lot of our parameters are set to 0. Okay, next we're going to zoom in on the timeline here and we're going to go across 4 frames. So using my time code here to 4 frames. Now I'm just going to select my layer, hit U on the keyboard, and that's just going to bring up the parameters that we've changed. Then we're going to start changing some of these. So the birth rate we're going to change to 22, velocity to 3.1, resistance to 199, birth size to 0.58, and the depth size we're just going to leave as 0. Okay, next we're going to go across to the 6 frame mark, and we should already start to see a rough explosion building as we move along. We're going to change this first part to 0, and we're just going to change this one to be easy ease, and we're also going to select the resistance and make that easy ease in. Alright, so if we just play through what we've got here, I'm just going to create a endpoint in my composition by hitting N on the keyboard. That's just going to help reset that. Now if we just play through what we've got here, you can see already we've got the explosion playing out. Now just very quickly to sort of give you an idea of what's actually happening here, if we look at our particle system, we've changed this to be lens convex. If for instance I just change this to be something else, you can see it changes the overall shape of what we're actually dealing with here. So what lens convex is actually doing is it's creating these bubbles, essentially layering them up at full opacity so we can't see through them, and then slowly fading them out, and they're shrinking in size. So that's what this birth size is. It's telling us how big we want the circle to be when it originally starts. And then we're telling it that we want it to be 0 when it fades out. So it's going to fade into nothing. And the velocity here is how fast they're going to shoot out. So if I make that much larger, it's obviously going to grow much larger in size. And the birth rate is obviously how many of these do we want it to produce when it first starts. So if I scale this right down to 0.1 or 2, you can see it just creates just a couple of spots there. So if I scale this right up, eventually you just get like a blob and it'll give you a more interesting outline. So that's basically what's happening here when we're messing around with these basic settings. The rest of it, you really don't need to know too much about. The longevity is how long you want each individual bubble to last. So this is a really good point to stop, and if you want to mess around and change the actual physics of your explosion, this is where you would do it. You would start messing around with all of those individual settings to get different effects. Now the next part of this is we want to actually change the color, and we want to be able to modify that over time. So we're going to come up to Effect, down to Generate, and we're going to add Fill. We're going to start at the beginning here. We're going to create a keyframe for our fill color, and we want to change our color here to be something around a sort of orange. You could go for a lighter yellow. This is basically the starting color. So for me, I'm going to go with this orange to sort of represent an explosion at the start. Then I'm going to come across to about 18 frames here and change the color to be more something of a gray color. So what we've done here is we've created a transition from an orange to a gray. So the other thing here is the transition's happening a bit fast. So I'm going to move my start keyframe so it stays orange longer and then fades quickly into that gray sort of color. So now we've got something that looks like this. Now the last part of this is optional, but we can add some glow by coming down to Stylize and then adding glow. And I'm going to line up with this keyframe here on my color. So here I'm going to make sure my glow threshold is set to 10%. My glow radius is set to 100. I'm going to set my glow intensity to be around 0.6 and create a keyframe. And make sure that this is set to behind. Depending on the version of After Effects you're using, you may find that you want to set this to be on top, and you may want to mess around with these 3 settings here just to change the look of how the glow is applied to your layer. But I'm going to leave mine as is here. I'm then going to transition across slightly, probably to somewhere just over halfway between these 2 fill keyframes. And I'm going to scale this intensity down to 0. So that sort of fades out like that. So we end up with quite an intense sort of start, and then it fades out into our gray sort of smoke color. All right, so that's what we've got there. Okay, that's the hard part over. Now the next part is easy. All we need to do is just take our finished layer, we're going to duplicate it, and we're going to scale this layer down slightly. The other thing we're going to change, you'll notice it's exactly the same as the layer underneath. We want to just change this random seed here just to a different number so that it changes the effect type that's being applied. The other thing we're going to do here is if I hit U on the keyboard, I can bring up the original color. I'm going to line my playhead up with that keyframe, and I'm going to change the color to be something a little bit lighter. So we're going for something just slightly lighter here. Again, you can mess around with those colors there. And again, we're also going to change the second color to be something slightly lighter again as well. And that's it. That's all we need to do for that layer. We're then going to go back and grab our bottom layer again. We're going to duplicate this one more time, drag that to the top. We're going to scale it down even further. We're going to change that random seed value again. I'm going to hit U on the keyboard to bring up the colors this time. And this time, all we're going to do is come over to our effects control and just delete the glow on this layer. Then we're going to grab our middle layer, duplicate that again, drag that to the top, and also delete that glow. And this time we're only going to slightly drag this one in. So it's roughly the same size, just change the random seed value again. Now if I quickly play through this, this is what we should have. So that's pretty much it. That is the basics to creating this effect inside of After Effects. From this point, all you have to do is mess around with those settings that we changed on each of the layers to get different results. So one part you can really mess around with here to get different effects is in the particle system by changing the type of particle type and the birth size. You can also mess around in the physics side by changing this to get different types of effects. So I could change to a directional normalize to get something a bit more side on, and that's pretty much it. The other thing you can do is add motion blur to all your layers, and that's just going to give it a bit of motion blur just to make it a little bit more realistic depending on the look that you're going for. If you want to change the speed, you can also grab these keyframes here and move them closer to the start. That'll speed up your effect. Or by changing the longevity of each of the particle lives to shorten or extend their life. So there you go guys, that's how you make 2D explosions inside of After Effects. I hope you've learned something. Thanks very much for watching. And remember, Flatpak Effects is the flat pack anyone can build.